Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Strahota bringing you your next American Government and Politics lesson. And this lesson will be on gerrymandering and redistricting. And what this is referring to is how states are broken down based off of congressional districts. For example, here's Virginia's 11 congressional districts. So each congressional district in Virginia elects one congressman or woman to the House of Representatives. The question posed here is, why do you think these districts are shaped the way they are? Well, we're going to get into that because you might not have any idea why or how they are shaped the way they are. So again, like I mentioned, this is on gerrymandering and redistricting, and if you have no idea what this is, that is perfect because that's what I'm here for. So, congressional districts. So the U.S. Census is taken every 10 years, as I've mentioned multiple times this year, and we have a census this year in 2020. And based off of this census and based off of the population, this determines the number of representatives each state gets in the House. So this is one reason it's important to fill out the census when it comes around. Not only are you legally obligated to, but if your population has grown in your state, you might potentially get additional House of Representatives, which typically is a good thing because the more representatives you have, hopefully the more good that can be done for your state. So the Congressional Act of 1929 froze the total number of congressional seats to 435, which is how many House of Representatives we have. And then if you add 435 plus the 100 U.S. senators, that's where we get the 535 representatives. After the census, state legislatures can redraw their districts based on the new population total. And this is where it can get a bit, let's say, unethical and not equitable, and I'll explain that in a second. And the governor then signs off on these new redrawings of the districts. So just as an example, we're going to look at Virginia again. These are Virginia's districts in 1982. All right, take a mental picture. All right. Now, this is what it looks like in 2016. So let's go back. All right, one more time so you can see some big changes with the boundaries that were drawn here. Well, why do you think this was done? Well, let's explain first the history of gerrymandering, and then we can get into why we think Virginia might have done that. So political parties redraw the districts to their advantage. So if there is a city that is voting one direction, you might want to redraw them into another district so you get all of the votes against you into one district as opposed into multiple. And again, I'll get into that in a minute. This is named after Massachusetts Governor Elbridge Gerry, so they just called it gerrymandering based off of his name. So in 1812, he helped redistrict Massachusetts to benefit his Democratic-Republican Party. So essentially, he redrew the lines in the state to benefit him and his political party. So when they voted, his party, the Democratic-Republican Party, would get more congressional seats in the U.S. Congress than if they didn't redraw the lines. And when mapped, they were said to resemble the shape of a salamander, which you can kind of see here. I'm not super duper familiar with salamanders, but I suppose that's relatively what one would look like. This looks more like a dragon to me, but that's just me. So how gerrymandering works. So here's how we're going to get into how this actually works and kind of hopefully can give you some type of visual of what this looks like. So let's say we have 50 precincts here. So gerrymandering helps the party in power to gain seats in the House of Representatives. So this can be done in two ways. Either cracking, which splits the voters of the opposing party into two different districts. So the advantage of this is instead of having one congressional district being dominated by one political party, you crack them into two different parts so there's less votes in each. The second way is you can packing, which is putting as many members of one party into one district to limit the amount of seats they win. So for example, let's take Wisconsin really quickly. We have 8 districts. So with that being said, if you were to split, if say Milwaukee, Dane County, say they vote mostly Democratic, or Dane County, Madison. Let's just use Dane County and Madison. They typically vote very strong Democrat. So if you were to redraw the districts in Wisconsin, if you're packing, you would draw the district right around Madison, so all of those Democratic votes only win one congressional seat. Whereas cracking would be if you were to draw a line right down the middle of Madison to split those Democratic votes into two different pieces. Now, again, that might lead to them winning 2 districts, but that's just an example. So I'm going to give you an example here on this next slide. So imagine that this is a region of your state. So imagine this is Wisconsin. The color represents the political leanings of people in that region. There are more greens than yellows, and this is pretty funny because the Green Bay Packers are green and yellow, so this works out really well for Wisconsin. So the question is, can you draw the 5 congressional district boundaries with 10 squares in each so that either 1, green wins all 5, or 2, yellow wins more than green? Now, if you really want to try this, you feel free to push pause in this video and you can try it right now. All right, hopefully you push pause by now. Now I'm going to move on. So, out of these 50 precincts, 60% are green, 40% are yellow. So if you wanted green to win all 5 districts, you could simply draw your regions like this, because this has 6, this one only has 4, this has 6, only 4, 6, 4, etc. You can see that they're all the same. And this leads to green winning 5. Well, if we look over here though, if you draw the lines differently than this one, look, you can get yellow to win 3 of the districts and green only to win 2, just based off of how you draw the lines. So you can see how this can be really unethical in some states where, based off of what political party your governor is, and based off of who is redrawing these lines, you can change what political parties can dominate in your state just simply by redrawing the lines, which again is not very fair whatsoever and is not ethical whatsoever. But we can always argue that politics isn't very ethical either. So you can see then how just simply redrawing the lines in a state or in a region can determine if you get 5 seats in the House of Representatives, or maybe you only get 2 and the other gets 3. Pretty interesting, but also, again, not very ethical. So you might be asking yourself, well, there's had to have been some rulings on this, right? Like, people have to bring this up because it's not ethical. Well, there has been Supreme Court rulings on gerrymandering. So the case of Baker versus Carr in 1962, this enabled federal courts to intervene in and to decide redistricting cases. So there is some checks and balances with this. Then there was Westbury versus Sanders 2 years later in 1964, where districts must be of equal population. So hopefully this gerrymandering isn't happening too often because the populations need to be equal populations. And then Shaw versus Reno in 1993, this redistricting based on race must be held to a strict standard of scrutiny. So through gerrymandering, only about 1/10 of congressional seats are competitive, which again, that means 9 out of 10 are not competitive, which that's not how government and democracy is supposed to work. And then makes a shift of more than a few seats unlikely from one election to the next, which again, we should be able to be voting people in who we feel are best for our state, and this makes it much more difficult to do that. So hopefully you learned a little bit on gerrymandering. I know if this is the first time you've ever heard about it, the concept might be new and maybe it's a little confusing, but again, the main takeaway is that every 10 years when we do a census, states are able to redraw their lines in their states to benefit their political party. Now, you can see the Supreme Court cases trying to put a stop to this. However, this is still something that can sometimes be a problem and is just another way that sometimes our political structure can be not quite as ethical as we would like it to be. So please feel free to reach out and ask any questions if you need any further clarification on this, and please make sure you fill out that guided note sheet as you listen through these notes. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and I hope to hear from you soon.